Jake Morrison stood in line with 20 other new soldiers. He was the shortest one there. At 22 years old, he barely reached 5 feet 7 inches in his military boots. The other humans around him were tall and strong. They had muscles that showed through their uniforms. Jake looked like a kid next to them. The assignment officer called names one by one. Each soldier stepped forward to get their new posting. Jake heard exciting places being called out. Some got assigned to big space stations near Earth. Others would serve on powerful warships that protected important trade routes. A few lucky ones got to work at the main military headquarters on Mars. Jake waited and waited. His name was the last one called. Private Jake Morrison, the officer said, reading from his digital pad. He looked up at Jake and frowned. Report to transport. Bay 7. You are going to Kepler 442b. The other soldiers went quiet. Jake had never heard of this planet before, but from the way everyone stared at him, it was not a good place to go. One soldier whistled low and shook his head. Another patted Jake on the shoulder and said, "Good luck, kid." Jake walked to Transport Base 7 with his single bag of belongings. The transport ship was old and dirty. Rust stains covered the hull. The engines made strange noises that did not sound healthy. An alien captain with blue skin and 4 arms waited at the loading ramp. "You must be the human," the captain said. His voice sounded like he was laughing at Jake. "I am Captain Crix. I have been flying to dangerous planets for 30 years, but I still think Command made a mistake sending you to that place." Jake climbed aboard the ship. The inside was just as dirty as the outside. Wires hung from the ceiling, the seats had tears in them. Everything smelled like old oil and something that might have been dead fish. "What kind of planet is Kepler 442b?" Jake asked as the ship lifted off. Captain Crix laughed out loud. "It is what we call a Deathworld, little human. The gravity will crush your bones if you are not careful. The air burns your lungs when you first breathe it. The plants try to eat you. The animals definitely try to eat you. Most aliens will not even fly close to that planet. They are too scared to land there." Jake felt his stomach drop. This was not what he had hoped for when he joined the military. He had wanted to see the galaxy and serve with honor. Instead, he was being sent to a planet that sounded like a nightmare. The flight took 3 days. Captain Crix told Jake stories about Kepler 442b during the long journey. He talked about trees that could kill you with electricity. He described animals, the size of buildings that hunted in packs. He mentioned storms that could melt metal and oceans that boiled during certain seasons. "Why are humans even trying to study this planet?" Jake asked on the second day. "Your people are crazy," Crix said with a grin. "Every other species in the galaxy looks at Deathworlds and says no thank you, but humans see danger and think it looks fun. That is why Command keeps sending soldiers like you to places like this." When they finally reached Kepler 442b, Jake pressed his face against the small window to get his first look. The planet was beautiful in a scary way. Swirling, clouds covered most of the surface. Where the clouds broke apart, Jake could see purple and silver forests. Red oceans stretched between dark continents. Lightning flashed constantly through the atmosphere. "Research Station Alpha 7 is down there somewhere," Crix said as he started the landing sequence. 14 humans have been sent there in the past 2 years. 13 of them asked to leave after their first week. One lasted a whole month before he broke down crying and begged to go home. The landing was rough. The ship bounced and shook as it fought through the thick atmosphere. Jake held onto his seat and tried not to throw up. When they finally touched down, Crix opened the cargo door and pointed outside. "There is your new home, little human. Try not to get eaten on your first day." Jake stepped off the ship onto solid ground. The gravity hit him immediately. Everything felt twice as heavy as it should. His backpack seemed to weigh 100 pounds. Even lifting his feet to walk was hard work. The research station sat in a clearing surrounded by the strangest forest Jake had ever seen. The trees looked like they were made of metal. They hummed with electrical energy that made the air taste sharp and sour. Strange sounds came from deep in the forest. Roars and calls and something that sounded almost like laughter echoed between the metallic trees. A voice spoke from speakers built into the station walls. "Welcome to Research Station Alpha 7, Private Morrison. I am Area, the station computer. Please proceed to the main airlock for orientation and safety briefing. Jake walked slowly toward the station. Each step was an effort in the heavy gravity. Behind him he heard Captain Crix's ship taking off again. The sound of the engines faded quickly, leaving Jake alone with the strange humming of the electric forest and the distant calls of things he could not see. The main door opened as he approached. Cool air rushed out, bringing relief from the thick atmosphere outside. Jake stepped inside and felt the door seal shut behind him. For a moment he stood in the entryway and listened to his own breathing. He was really here, on a Deathworld, alone except for whatever research team was already stationed here. Through the thick walls of the station he could still hear the sounds from outside. Something large was moving through the forest, something that made the ground shake with each step it took. Jake wondered what kinds of creatures lived out there in the electric trees. He wondered if any of them were looking at the research station right now, thinking about the new human that had just arrived. He wondered if he would last, longer than the others who had come before him. 3 days had passed since Jake arrived at Research Station Alpha 7. He was still getting used to the heavy gravity that made every movement feel like he was walking through thick mud. His body ached constantly, but he was slowly getting stronger. The station had only 5 other people. Lieutenant Ryan Carter was in charge. He was a tall man with gray hair who had been on Kepler 442b for 6 months. Dr. Lisa Hamilton studied the local animals and plants. 2 technicians named Pete and Maria kept the equipment working. The last person was Corporal Danny Webb, who handled security. The rule is simple, Lieutenant Carter had told Jake on his first day. Never go outside alone, never go beyond the cleared area around the station, and never, ever approach any of the local wildlife. Most of the creatures on this planet can kill you without even trying. Jake had spent his first 2 days learning about the station and reading files about the planet. The computer showed him pictures and videos of the local animals. There were things called void stalkers that could turn invisible and had claws like swords. Flying creatures called sky rippers had teeth that could bite through metal. Plasma. Worms lived underground and could melt rocks with acid they spit from their mouths. But the most dangerous animal was something called a Nexus Ravager. The files said they were 12 feet tall and weighed as much as a small truck. They had 6 legs, armor-like skin, and 3 rows of teeth. The report said that one Ravager had killed 12 alien soldiers in less than 30 seconds. They were smart, fast, and completely deadly. On his 3rd day, Jake was assigned to do a patrol around the station. Lieutenant Carter gave him a radio, a scanner, and a plasma rifle that felt too heavy in his hands. "Just walk the perimeter," Carter said. "Check the sensors and make sure the electric fence is working. Stay inside the cleared area. If you see anything moving in the forest, do not investigate, call for backup, and return to the station immediately." Jake nodded and stepped outside. The morning air was thick and warm. The metallic trees hummed, their strange song. Purple grass covered the ground and it made crunching sounds under his boots. In the distance, he could hear the calls of animals he could not identify. He walked slowly around the station, checking each sensor post. Everything seemed normal. The electric fence was working properly. The cleared area around the station was empty except for some small flying insects that looked like tiny rainbows. Jake was almost finished with his patrol when he heard a sound that made him freeze. Heavy footsteps were coming through the forest. Something big was walking toward the station. Jake grabbed his radio to call for help, but then he stopped. The creature that emerged from the forest was the most incredible thing Jake had ever seen. It was huge, standing 12 feet tall on 6 powerful legs. Its skin was covered in scales that changed color like oil on water. The head was massive, with 4 glowing eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. It had to be a Nexus Ravager. Jake should have run. Every part of his training told him to get back to the station as fast as possible. The creature could cover the distance between them in seconds. It could tear him apart before he could even raise his weapon. But Jake did not run. He stood perfectly still and watched as the Ravager approached. There was something in the way it moved that seemed almost careful. It was not charging at him, like a predator attacking prey. It was walking slowly, almost like it was being polite. The Ravager stopped about 10 feet away from Jake. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Jake could see intelligence in those 4 glowing eyes. This was not just a mindless beast. It was thinking, studying him just as much as he was studying it. Then the Ravager did something that made Jake question everything he had read in the files. The massive creature sat down on its haunches and tilted its enormous head to one side. It made a sound that was definitely not a growl or a roar. It was a whine, soft and almost pleading. Jake had heard that exact sound before. His dog Max used to make the same noise when he wanted attention or treats. The Ravager was acting like a friendly pet, not a deadly predator. "You have got to be kidding me," Jake whispered. The creature's thick tail began to wag back and forth, brushing against the purple grass. Its 4 eyes focused on Jake with what looked like hope. It whined again, a little louder this time. Jake knew he was about to do something incredibly stupid. Every regulation said he should never approach local wildlife. But something about the way the Ravager was acting made him think it was not dangerous, at least not to him. Very slowly, Jake reached out his hand toward the massive head. The Ravager stayed perfectly still as Jake's fingers touched the scales on its snout. The skin was warm and surprisingly smooth. The creature closed all 4 eyes and made a deep rumbling sound that could only be described as purring. Jake could not believe what was happening. He was petting a 12-foot monster, and it was enjoying it. The Ravager gently pressed its head against Jake's hand like a cat asking for more attention. "You are not what the file said you were," Jake said softly. "Are you?" The creature opened its eyes and looked at Jake with what seemed like understanding. It made a soft, huffing sound. That might have been agreement. Jake spent the next 20 minutes sitting in the grass and scratching behind the Ravager's ears. The creature rolled over onto its side, exposing its belly. Its tail never stopped wagging. It acted exactly like an enormous, friendly dog. That was how Lieutenant Carter found them. Jake heard boots running through the grass and looked up to see Carter approaching with his weapon drawn. The lieutenant stopped dead when he saw Jake sitting next to the Ravager, which was still lying on its side getting belly rubs. "Morrison," Carter said very slowly, "step away from the creature right now." "I do not think it wants to hurt me, sir," Jake replied, continuing to scratch the Ravager's belly. "I think it just wants to be friends." The Ravager made its rumbling, purr sound and wiggled happily in the grass. One of its massive legs kicked slightly, just like a dog getting a good belly rub. Lieutenant Carter stared at the scene in front of him. In 6 months on Kepler 442b, he had never seen anything like this. The most dangerous predator on the planet was acting like a household pet with the smallest, youngest soldier on the base. "This is impossible," Carter muttered. "Nexus Ravagers are solitary killers. They do not interact with other species. They certainly do not roll over for belly rubs." But the evidence was right in front of him. Jake Morrison, the recruit who looked like he would have trouble opening a jar of pickles, had somehow befriended a creature that could have swallowed him whole. The Ravager noticed Lieutenant Carter and raised its head to look at him. For a moment, Carter tensed, ready to fire his weapon, but the creature just looked at him curiously, then turned back to Jake and nuzzled his shoulder gently. "Sir," Jake said, "I think we might have been wrong about these animals. This one is not a mindless killer. It is smart, and I think it was lonely." Lieutenant Carter slowly lowered his weapon. He activated his radio and called back to the station. "Dr. Hamilton, you need to get out here right now, and bring your cameras. You are not going to believe what Private Morrison has discovered." 2 weeks had passed since Jake first met the Ravager he had started calling Bear. Despite all the rules about not naming local wildlife, the name had stuck. Bear was just too friendly and playful to think of as a dangerous predator. Dr. Lisa, Hamilton watched through her binoculars as Jake and Bear played together in the clearing outside the research station. Bear was lying on his back while Jake scratched his belly. The massive creature's tail wagged so hard it was digging grooves in the purple grass. "This should not be possible," Dr. Hamilton said to Lieutenant Carter. They were standing on the station's observation deck, watching the daily routine that had developed between Jake and Bear. Nexus Ravagers are supposed to be completely solitary. They only come together to mate, and even then they fight more than anything else. Lieutenant. Carter nodded, still amazed by what he was seeing. The kid has been out there for 3 hours today. Bear follows him around like a trained dog. Yesterday I watched Bear bring Jake a stick and drop it at his feet. Dr. Hamilton had been studying the recordings she had made of Jake and Bear's interactions. What she found was changing everything they thought they knew about Nexus Ravagers. I have been analyzing Bear's behavior patterns. His brain scans show activity levels that suggest high intelligence, problem-solving abilities, emotional responses that are much more complex than we ever imagined. Down in the clearing, Jake was walking the perimeter while Bear walked beside him. The massive creature stayed exactly 3 feet to Jake's left, matching his pace perfectly. When Jake stopped to check a sensor, Bear sat down and waited patiently. When Jake moved on, Bear stood up and followed. "Look at that coordination," Dr. Hamilton said, pointing at the pair. Bear is not just following Jake randomly. He is positioning himself to watch for threats from the forest while Jake focuses on his work. They are working together like a team. This became even more clear when a pack of small predators emerged from the forest. Voidstalkers, about the size of large dogs but with silver fur that let them blend into shadows. There were 6 of them, and they were moving toward Jake with clear, hunting intentions. Jake did not even notice them at first. He was focused on replacing a broken sensor and had his back to the forest. But Bear saw them immediately. The massive Ravager moved between Jake and the approaching stalkers without making a sound. He did not roar or growl. He simply stood there, all 12 feet of him, and stared at the smaller predators. The stalkers took one look at Bear and decided they had somewhere else to be. They vanished back into the forest so quickly that Jake never even knew they had been there. "Did you see that?" Lieutenant Carter asked. Bear protected Jake without even being asked, and he did it quietly so he would not scare the kid. Dr. Hamilton was recording everything. This level of protective behavior toward another species is completely unknown among Nexus Ravagers. Bear is not just friendly with Jake. He cares about Jake's safety. The bond between them grew stronger every day. Jake had started bringing Bear treats from the station's food supplies. Bear loved the protein bars that the soldiers ate, and he would sit like an enormous dog waiting for Jake to hand them out. In return, Bear had started bringing Jake things he found in the forest. Interesting rocks, strange plants, once even a piece of metal that turned out to be from an old crashed ship. "It is like they are trading gifts," Dr. Hamilton observed. Bear understands the concept of reciprocity. He knows that Jake brings him food, so he brings Jake things in return. The other members of the research team were slowly getting used to having Bear around. At first, everyone except Jake had been terrified of the massive creature, but Bear was so gentle and careful around humans that even the most nervous team members had started to relax. Bear seemed to understand that he was much bigger and stronger than the humans. He moved slowly and carefully when people were nearby. If someone dropped something, Bear would carefully pick it up in his mouth and place it where they could reach it, being very gentle with his enormous teeth. Corporal Danny Webb had been the most resistant to accepting Bear, but even he was coming around. "I have to admit," he told Jake one evening, "that thing has probably made our perimeter security better, not worse. Nothing wants to mess with an area that has a Nexus Ravager hanging around." This proved to be true when a pack of much larger predators approached the station one night. Sky Rippers, flying creatures with 20-foot wingspans and razor-sharp beaks. They usually hunted in groups and could tear apart the station's outer defenses if they really wanted to. But when the Sky Rippers saw Bear sleeping near the station entrance, they circled overhead for a few minutes and then flew away to find easier prey. Bear had not even woken up, but his mere presence was enough to convince the flying predators to look elsewhere. Bear is not just Jake's friend, Dr. Hamilton realized. He is protecting all of us. This entire area has become safer because Bear considers it his territory now. Jake started taking Bear with him on longer expeditions around the research area. With Bear at his side, Jake could explore places that had been too dangerous for humans to visit before. Bear seemed to know which plants were safe to touch, and which ones would try to grab Jake with poisonous vines. He knew which areas of the forest had unstable ground that might collapse under human weight. One day Jake discovered that Bear could understand simple human words. When Jake said sit, Bear would sit. When Jake said stay, Bear would remain in place until Jake called him. When Jake said home, Bear would head back toward the research station. He is learning our language, Jake told Dr. Hamilton that evening. Not just responding to sounds, but actually understanding what the words mean. Dr. Hamilton was fascinated. I want to test his learning abilities. Can you teach him more complex commands? Over the next few days, Jake taught Bear to fetch specific objects, to wait at certain locations, and even to search for things that Jake had hidden. Bear learned every new command quickly and seemed to enjoy the mental challenges. But the most amazing discovery came when Jake was injured during a routine expedition. He slipped on wet rocks near a stream and twisted his ankle badly. Jake tried to walk back to the station, but the pain was too much. He sat down on a fallen log and activated his emergency radio to call for help. Before he could even speak into the radio, Bear was examining Jake's injured foot with careful precision. The massive creature sniffed at the ankle, then very gently touched it with one enormous claw. When Jake winced in pain, Bear made a soft whining sound that clearly expressed concern. Then Bear did something that amazed everyone back at the station. He laid down next to the fallen log and positioned himself so that Jake could climb onto his back. Bear had figured out on his own that Jake was hurt and needed help getting home. The ride back to the station was slow and careful. Bear moved with incredible precision, making sure not to jostle Jake or cause him more pain. When they reached the station, Bear gently lowered himself so that Jake could slide off his back safely. Dr. Hamilton treated Jake's ankle while Bear waited outside the medical bay. The massive creature pressed his nose against the window and watched everything that was happening. He did not leave until Jake came outside and showed him that the ankle was bandaged and healing. That was not instinct, Dr. Hamilton said later. Bear saw that Jake was injured, understood what needed to be done, and came up with a solution. That kind of reasoning ability is remarkable. Lieutenant Carter was writing his weekly report to command. "How do I explain this?" he asked Dr. Hamilton. "How do I tell them that our biggest security asset is a 12-foot predator that likes belly rubs and brings the soldiers presents?" Dr. Hamilton smiled as she watched Jake and Bear playing fetch in the clearing. "You tell them the truth. You tell them that Private Morrison has made the most important first contact discovery in galactic history, and you tell them that we need to completely rethink everything we know about Deathworld creatures." The big ship appeared in the sky on a Tuesday morning during Jake's 6th week on Kepler 442b. Jake was outside with Bear, teaching him a new game with a metal disc they had found near the forest edge. Bear was getting very good at catching the disc and bringing it back without leaving tooth marks on it. Lieutenant Carter's voice crackled over the outdoor speakers. "All personnel report to the main briefing room immediately. We have visitors." Jake looked up at the sky and saw the massive shape of a consortium battlecruiser hanging in the clouds above them. Ships that big only came to planets when something very important was happening. Jake felt his stomach tighten with worry. Bear seemed to sense Jake's concern. The massive creature nuzzled Jake's shoulder gently and made a soft, questioning sound. Jake scratched behind Bear's ears, trying to calm both himself and his friend. "I have to go inside for a while," Jake told Bear. "You wait here, okay? Stay close to the station." Bear huffed once, which Jake had learned meant yes or "I understand." The intelligent creature settled down near the station entrance to wait. Inside the briefing room, the research team gathered around a large screen that showed the image of a tall alien with silver skin and cold blue eyes. This was Ambassador Thane Corvallis, one of the most powerful officials in the consortium government. "Greetings, Research Station Alpha 7, Ambassador Corvallis said. His voice was smooth but unfriendly. "I am conducting an inspection of all consortium Deathworld operations. My transport will arrive at your location within the hour." Lieutenant Carter looked worried. "Sir, we are honored by your visit. Is there anything specific you need to review?" "I am here to determine whether this facility serves any useful purpose," Corvallis replied. "Initial reports suggest that significant resources are being wasted on a planet that offers no strategic or scientific value. I will be conducting interviews with all personnel and reviewing your operational procedures. The screen went dark. Lieutenant Carter turned to face his team. People, this is serious. Ambassador Corvallis has the authority to shut down this entire operation. He can transfer all of us to different assignments, or even end our careers if he decides we are not doing valuable work. Dr. Hamilton raised her hand. What about Bear? Should we mention our discoveries about Nexus Ravager intelligence and behavior? Absolutely not, Carter said firmly. Corvallis is known for his strict interpretation of consortium regulations. If he learns that we have been allowing a local predator to interact freely with station personnel, he will consider it a serious safety violation. Jake felt his heart sink. So we just pretend Bear does not exist? For now, yes, Carter replied. Morrison, I need you to keep Bear away from the station while the ambassador is here. Take him into the forest if you have to. Do whatever it takes to make sure Corvallis does not see him. An hour later, 3 transport shuttles landed near the research station. Ambassador Corvallis emerged from the lead shuttle, followed by 20 consortium peacekeepers in full armor. The soldiers carried heavy weapons and moved like they expected trouble. Jake watched from the forest edge where he was hiding with Bear. The massive creature seemed to understand that something was wrong. He stayed perfectly quiet and kept his body low to the ground. The peacekeepers set up a security perimeter around the station while Ambassador Corvallis went inside to begin his inspection. Jake could see the soldiers through the trees. They looked nervous and kept scanning the forest with their weapons ready. Sergeant Kyle Brooks was the leader of the peacekeeper unit. He was a big man with scars on his face and the kind of eyes that said he had seen a lot of combat. He did not look like someone who would be interested in hearing about friendly alien creatures. For 3 hours, Jake and Bear waited in the forest, while the inspection continued. Bear was incredibly patient, but Jake could tell that the creature was getting worried about being separated from the station for so long. This was the first time since they had met that Bear had been kept away from his usual territory around the research facility. Finally, Jake's radio crackled with Lieutenant Carter's voice. Morrison, returned to the station immediately. The ambassador wants to interview you. Jake looked at Bear and felt terrible about what he had to do next. You have to stay here, he told his friend. Hide in the trees and do not come out no matter what happens. I will come back for you as soon as I can. Bear whined softly and pressed his massive head against Jake's chest. The creature clearly did not want to be left alone, but he seemed to understand that it was important. Jake walked back to the station alone, feeling like he was betraying his best friend. Inside the main briefing room, Ambassador Corvallis was waiting with a digital pad full of questions. The ambassador was even more intimidating in person. He was nearly 7 feet tall, and his silver skin seemed to reflect light in a way that made him look almost metallic. Private Morrison, Corvallis said, reading from his pad. You have been on Kepler 442b for 6 weeks. What is your assessment of this planet's strategic value? Jake chose his words carefully. Sir, I believe that studying Deathworld environments helps us understand how humans can operate in extreme conditions. This knowledge could be valuable for future colonization efforts. And what specific discoveries have you made during your time here? Jake's mouth went dry. He wanted to tell the ambassador about Bear, about the intelligence and emotional complexity of Nexus Ravagers, about the potential for peaceful contact with dangerous species. But he remembered Lieutenant Carter's warning. I have learned that the local ecosystem is more complex than initial reports suggested, Jake said. The interaction between different species shows patterns that might be useful for understanding planetary biology. Ambassador Corvallis made notes on his pad. Have you encountered any of the indigenous predator species? Yes, sir, from a safe distance. And your assessment of the threat level they pose to human operations? Jake hesitated. This was his chance to tell the truth about Bear, to explain that not all of the local predators were mindlessly hostile. But one look at the ambassador's cold expression told him that the truth would not be welcome. They are dangerous, sir, but with proper precautions, human personnel can operate safely. Corvallis nodded and made more notes. Private Morrison, it is my understanding that you are the smallest and least experienced soldier ever assigned to a Deathworld posting. Why do you think Command sent someone like you to such a dangerous location? The question felt like an insult, but Jake tried to answer honestly. I do not know, sir. Maybe they thought I would be good at adapting to difficult situations. Or maybe they considered you expendable, Corvallis said with a cruel smile. Perhaps Command decided that if Kepler 442b killed another soldier, it might as well be one who would not be missed. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. I prefer to think that every soldier has value, regardless of their size or experience level. The interview continued for another hour. Ambassador, Corvallis asked detailed questions about station operations, safety procedures, and resource allocation. Jake answered as best he could while trying not to reveal anything about Bear. When the interview was finally over, Jake hurried outside to find his friend. But Bear was not where Jake had left him. The massive creature was nowhere to be seen. In the forest edge, Jake activated his radio. Lieutenant Carter, I cannot find Bear. He was supposed to wait for me, but he is gone. Keep looking, Carter replied, and keep him away from the ambassador. Corvallis is planning to stay here for 3 more days. Jake spent the next 2 hours searching the forest, calling Bear's name quietly so the peacekeepers would not hear him. He was starting to panic when he finally found Bear hiding in a deep ravine nearly a mile from the station. The massive creature was lying on his belly with his head between his paws, looking miserable. There you are, Jake said, sliding down into the ravine. I was so worried about you. Bear lifted his head and made a sad whining sound. He pressed his nose against Jake's hand and looked up at him with all 4 eyes full of confusion and hurt. Jake realized what had happened. Bear did not understand why he was being hidden away. The creature thought he had done something wrong, that Jake was angry with him or did not want him around anymore. No, Jake said, wrapping his arms around Bear's massive neck. You did not do anything wrong. I still love you, buddy. It is just that there are some bad people at the station right now and they would not understand how special you are. Bear seemed to understand. He nuzzled Jake gently and made his rumbling purr sound. But Jake could see that the separation was hurting his friend. Bear was a social creature, and being forced to hide away from his territory and his human companion was causing him real emotional pain. That night, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He could not keep hiding Bear like he was something to be ashamed of. His friend deserved better than that. If Ambassador Corvallis was going to shut down the station anyway, then Jake was going to make sure the truth came out first. He just had to figure out how to do it without getting everyone in trouble. The next morning, Jake made his choice. He could not keep Bear hidden any longer. His friend was suffering from being separated from the station, and Jake knew it was wrong to treat him like a dangerous secret. Jake found Bear in the ravine where he had been hiding. The massive creature looked sad and confused. His usual playful energy was gone, replaced by a depression that broke Jake's heart. Come on, buddy, Jake said, scratching behind Bear's ears. We are going home. Bear's 4 eyes lit up with hope. He stood quickly, his tail starting to wag for the first time in 2 days. Together, they walked out of the forest toward the research station. Ambassador Corvallis was standing on the observation deck with Sergeant Brooks, reviewing security procedures, when Jake and Bear emerged from the tree line. The ambassador saw them first. His silver face went pale with shock. Sergeant Brooks, Corvallis said slowly, please tell me that is not a Nexus Ravager walking casually toward this station with one of your soldiers. Sergeant Brooks grabbed his binoculars and focused on Jake and Bear. Sir, that appears to be exactly what it is. All units, we have a code red situation. Hostile predator approaching the station with possible human hostage. Peacekeepers rushed out of the station with their weapons ready. They surrounded Jake and Bear in the clearing, plasma rifles aimed at the massive creature. Bear stopped walking and moved protectively in front of Jake, but he did not show any signs of aggression. He simply sat down and waited, like he had been trained to do. Stand down, Ambassador Corvallis ordered over the comm system. Do not fire unless the creature attacks. Jake raised his hands to show he was not in danger. Ambassador Corvallis, please do not hurt him. Bear is not a threat to anyone. Bear? Corvallis's voice carried clearly across the clearing. You named it? Lieutenant Carter and Dr. Hamilton rushed outside, both looking terrified at what was happening. Carter activated his radio. Morrison, step away from the creature immediately. That is a direct order. No, sir, Jake said firmly. I will not abandon my friend. Sergeant Brooks moved closer with his weapon trained on Bear's head. Son, that thing is a known killer. Nexus Ravagers have attacked military units across this sector. You need to get clear so we can neutralize the threat. Bear sensed the hostile intentions of the soldiers around him. His scales darkened to deep black and his 4 eyes began to glow brighter. A low growl rumbled in his chest. For the first time since Jake had known him, Bear looked like the dangerous predator described in the military files. But Bear did not attack. Instead, he gently pushed Jake behind him with one massive foreleg and positioned himself as a shield between his friend and the armed soldiers. Every muscle in Bear's body was tense and ready for battle, but he held back his natural instincts because he did not want to hurt Jake by starting a fight. You see? Jake called out to the circle of soldiers. He is protecting me, not threatening me. Bear could have killed all of you by now if he wanted to. But he is choosing not to fight, because he knows it would upset me. Ambassador Corvallis descended from the observation deck with fury in his cold blue eyes. Private Morrison, you have violated every safety protocol in the Consortium Military Code. That creature is a Class A predator. Your unauthorized contact with it puts this entire facility at risk. With respect, sir, Jake replied, I think you are wrong about what the real risk is here. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. 20 armed peacekeepers kept their weapons aimed at Bear while the massive creature remained perfectly still, protecting Jake with his body but refusing to attack even when threatened. Then Dr. Hamilton's voice crackled over the comm system with urgent panic. All personnel, we have incoming hostiles from the northern forest. Multiple contacts moving fast. Void Stalker pack, estimated 40 to 50 individuals. Sergeant Brooks cursed and activated his tactical scanner. Confirmed. Large pack of Ryu. Predators approaching from multiple directions. They will reach the station perimeter in less than 3 minutes. Void Stalkers were pack hunters that could phase in and out of normal space, making them extremely difficult to fight. A pack of 50 would overwhelm the station's defenses easily. Even with 20 armed peacekeepers, the odds were not good. But, before anyone could react, Bear was already moving. The massive Ravager bounded toward the forest with incredible speed, his protective instincts overriding everything else. He was heading straight toward the approaching pack of stalkers, putting himself between them and the humans he cared about. He is trying to protect the station, Jake realized. He is trying to protect all of us. Jake grabbed a plasma rifle from the nearest peacekeeper and sprinted after Bear. Behind him, he could hear Lieutenant Carter shouting orders, but Jake was already past the perimeter fence and running toward the sound of battle. He found Bear fighting desperately against impossible odds. The massive Ravager was using his size and strength to devastating effect, but 50 Void Stalkers were too many for any single creature to handle. They attacked from all sides, phasing in and out of visibility, striking with razor-sharp claws, and vanishing before Bear could retaliate. Jake opened fire with his plasma rifle, targeting stalkers that were trying to flank Bear's position. His smaller size and mobility allowed him to move between the trees and attack from angles that Bear could not reach. When groups of stalkers tried to overwhelm Jake's position, Bear's massive presence kept them at bay. They fought as a perfect team. Jake's tactical training and ranged weapons complemented Bear's raw power and natural hunting instincts. Where Bear's size made him vulnerable to hit-and-run attacks, Jake provided covering fire. Where the stalkers tried to surround Jake, Bear's protective fury drove them back. From the station's observation deck, Ambassador Corvallis watched the battle with growing amazement. He was seeing something that challenged every assumption he had ever made about humans and Deathworld creatures. Here was a young soldier, the smallest and least experienced member of the unit, fighting alongside an apex predator in perfect harmony. Sergeant Brooks, Corvallis said quietly, order your men to provide supporting fire. Do not target the Ravager. Sir? Brooks looked confused. You heard me, Sergeant. The human and the creature are working together. Support them. The peacekeepers opened fire from the station perimeter, adding their plasma rifles to the battle. With coordinated fire support, Jake and Bear were able to drive off the remaining stalkers. The surviving pack members retreated into the deep forest, deciding that easier prey could be found elsewhere. When the battle was over, Jake and Bear stood together in a clearing littered with defeated stalkers. Both were breathing heavily and covered in minor wounds, but they were alive. Bear nuzzled Jake gently, checking him for serious injuries with careful precision. Jake responded by scratching behind Bear's ears, their bond stronger than ever after facing danger together. Ambassador. Corvallis walked slowly out to meet them. The tall alien studied Jake and Bear for a long moment before speaking. Private Morrison, he said finally, your actions today were completely against regulations. You disobeyed direct orders, endangered yourself unnecessarily, and violated every protocol regarding contact with indigenous predators. Jake stood at attention, ready to accept whatever punishment was coming. Yes, sir. However, Corvallis continued, what I witnessed today has forced me to reconsider my entire assessment of this operation. The tactical value of human-indigenous cooperation could be revolutionary. The defensive capabilities demonstrated by your partnership with this creature exceed anything in our current military doctrine. Bear huffed softly and sat down next to Jake, his tail wagging slowly. Furthermore, the ambassador said, your relationship with this ravager suggests that humans possess unique qualities that make them ideal for Deathworld operations and first contact scenarios. No other species in the consortium has ever achieved peaceful cooperation with a Class A predator. Ambassador Corvallis activated his communication device and spoke to his ship in orbit. Command, this is Corvallis. Cancel the shutdown order for Research Station Alpha 7. Instead, I am recommending immediate expansion of operations. We need to study human-indigenous cooperation protocols as a priority research project. Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. Sir, does this mean Bear can stay? Private Morrison, your companion will be classified as a cooperative indigenous partner under consortium protection laws. You will be promoted to sergeant and designated as our first human xenobiological liaison officer. Bear seemed to understand that good things were happening. He rolled over onto his back, exposing his belly for scratches. Ambassador Corvallis stared at the sight of a 12-foot predator acting like a playful pet. One question, Sergeant Morrison, Corvallis said. How did you know that the creature would not harm you when you first encountered it? Jake thought about the question seriously. I guess I just tried to see Bear the way he really was, not the way the file said he should be. Maybe that is what humans do best. We look for the good in others even when everyone else sees only the danger. 6 months later, Jake received his next assignment. He and Bear were being transferred to a new research station on an even more dangerous planet, where first contact specialists were needed to establish relations with another intelligent species. They boarded the transport ship together. Jake reflected on everything,